When I thought about retirement a few years ago, I didn't know it would include a tiny home. In fact, nothing is the way that I thought it would be when I retired. My tiny home journey has been pretty extensive. Um, there's just a lot to try to pack into one video. So I'm going to make this a mini series on how we got to where we are now. And I think that will probably make more sense, especially if you are looking into buying a tiny home. Where do you park a tiny home? Where you live matters. There's just a lot of different things. Downsizing is a big one. So I think a mini series on this will probably be more helpful than just trying to stuff everything into one video. Last year in 2025, when I had turned 62, I really wanted to leave my corporate job. I had been there 9 years at the time, and I was ready to leave. Emotionally, I was done. But being 62, I can't just hop off and try to find another job. And that didn't even interest me in any way. I didn't want to go. I was done with the corporate life. I was done with the cutthroat. And I didn't have a clue on how I could make it happen. Um, we were renting at the time, we were leasing, and rent is always going to go up. Utilities were insanely high. And those two things just alone made me feel like I would be working until I was 80 years old or until I couldn't move anymore. I felt trapped. And honestly, I kind of felt depressed because I didn't see a way out. Um, I didn't save a lot when I was younger. And so I really, really felt stuck. And it's a horrible feeling to be in. But I know a lot of people that are in that same boat, and it's not a good place to be. And so we began looking for alternatives on how I could get out of this and what made sense. And I know at the time I was feeling major job burnout, wanting to leave and feeling stuck, um, fear of being laid off while I was still renting, and I wanted a more peaceful life. I wanted a more simple life. I feel like I earned that. I've worked my life since I was 15 years old. I started working, and I've been working ever since. There's rarely been a break in my working life in since I was age 15. That's a lot of working years. And so I felt like, hey, I want a more peaceful life. I want to, you know, just be more relaxed, not just to sit around and do nothing, but allow myself to be more creative. I wanted to do things that I had put off just because I had to work. And so buying a traditional home at the time didn't make a lot of sense because the mortgage would have been too high for what my retirement, Social Security, what that would be. It would have just been too high. It would have been a big stretch. And it would have also been a 30-year mortgage. And who wants to take out a 30-year mortgage when you're in your 60s? And so we had sat down and started talking, how can we make this happen? What can we do? We had tried for a traditional house to buy when I was, I guess we must have been in our 30s, 40s at the time. And I was turned down. Well, I wasn't turned down. I could have gotten the loan. Um, but I would have had to put down a really big down payment. My credit was fine, but I had my the debt to ratio was very high because um, I had a lot of student loans. And because of that, even though they were manageable and I was making payments, it's just not the way they calculated it. And even today, it's the same thing. We actually tried for another home in late 2024, and I ran into the same scenario. And so at that point, I was like, maybe this isn't the answer. Maybe we just don't want to go down this road. And so we started talking about tiny homes as a haha. Maybe we should just go get a tiny home, haha. Because we had been fascinated with tiny homes for like 20 years. But back 20 years ago, they were more of a DIY type of home. And I was so fascinated with how people came up with these creative ways of living in these tight spaces. And they were really tight. I mean, some of them were 150 square feet. And unless it's set up really well, it can feel like you're really, really claustrophobic. And being claustrophobic, it just didn't make sense how we could make it work. But we began. We hadn't saw one in person. We only saw these online, and we began looking more at some videos online. And it was like, wow, they've come a long way in 20 years. They look like a home, just smaller. And that's, remember, I commented on it. We hadn't seen it in person yet, but we just looked at them and was like, wow, they seem like they're built like a regular home in a smaller package. But you can opt in to getting like full size appliances, which we did in ours, and it all depends on what you want. We were interested in the park model, which is basically a little bit larger. It's well, a little bit larger. It's 399 square feet or less. And those are the rules in the United States for it to be considered still an RV. So that's how that works with tiny homes and their size. It's different in different countries. That's how it is in the US. And that means a difference in property taxes and all of that. Uh, and so we started talking about it and looking at them, and really, I was surprised at how great they really looked. And so we thought, well, maybe this could be a way for me to get out of this job, buy a home that, I was looking at under 100K for sure. I wanted it to be under 80K actually. And I thought maybe we could do this. Buy it new, and so we uh, we didn't look at any at that point. We still were looking. We were calling people, and one of the things that I was most concerned about is we have been collecting things, and when you're in your 60s, you usually have a mass of things that you've collected over the years. And it's like, how are we going to be able to downsize into 399 square feet? How is that going to look like? How is it even possible? And so around October of last year is when we actually went to go look at one. And I was really surprised at how large it felt inside, much larger than I thought it would. And it had furniture and it was already staged. And so I was really surprised. I was like, maybe we could do this. And so we started looking at some that were under 80K, like I wanted. And you can customize them. There's so many options out there. I mean, if you don't like one, it doesn't matter. Go look at another one. You'll find another one. There are so many to look at, and there's so many channels now where you can look at different models and get an idea of what they cost, and go and visit and look in person if it's something of interest. But I wanted to share just how far the tiny home industry has come just since the 2000s. So I'm looking down because I wrote this down so I wouldn't forget. But during the early 2000s, it was DIY era, where it was environmentally conscious people leaving a smaller footprint. It was wonderful. I remember seeing them and thinking, that's really cool. I couldn't do it, but that's really cool. I thought it was cool at the time. And then we move into 2008, where we had the financial crisis. There was a recession at the time, and people were looking for different housing options because housing is one of our biggest um, expenses. And so that went on and through the 2010s, where we had the pandemic. In 2020, we had the pandemic. I'm sorry, I got my dates confused. In 2020 to present, in 2020, we had the pandemic, and that made a lot of people work from home. Um, and at that time, tiny homes then became more mainstream. We saw TV shows like House Hunters, Tiny Home House Hunters, and things like that. And you got a view inside these tiny homes. And so it became more mainstream. And a recent poll was 73% of Americans now said they now would consider living in a tiny home. So that's huge compared to just what, 20 years ago. 20 years ago, it wasn't really a thing, only for certain people that could build them, but for the masses, it wasn't a possibility. And so when I was laid off, well, I was shocked last week that I was laid off because I'd been there 10 years. I was so happy that we had already gone through this process of downsizing and purchasing the home, and now we're at a set price where it's much less than we were paying for rent and utilities and all of that mess. So I would have been in a much worse situation had we have not done this. And so if you're considering it and you can do it, I mean, your job, it may be great. You may feel like, it's secure and whatnot, but no job is really 100% secure. And lately, it seems that companies are laying off and blaming AI and all of this. Maybe some of it is true. I think a lot of it is just a good excuse because it sounds better to say we're, implementing AI and all of that and whatever. But anyway, if you're thinking about it, hey, shoot me any questions you have in the comments. I'm happy to answer them. We've been through everything, so I've kind of become, I feel like, a tiny home mini expert. After you've gone through this process, you will too, and then now it feels like home. And yes, it's much more peaceful where we live. And but I do want in my next video, following this one, I want to talk about the downsizing and how emotionally impacting that was to getting rid of things, and not just getting rid of things, but things that meant something to you, and what do you keep and what not do you keep and where do you even start. And so we'll get into that on my next video, but I just wanted to start this series with just basically how it all came to be that we even started thinking about tiny home living. And if you're thinking about it, hey, leave a comment. What are some fears you have? Why couldn't you? Why do you want to? Whatever you want to talk about, we'll talk about in the comments. And hey, I thank you for stopping by, and I'll see you on my next video. Bye for now.